Welcome to part 2 of our HTTP module in Make tutorial series. In this video, we're going to look at JSON because you need to understand JSON and what it is and how it works in order to understand HTTP module requests inside of make.com. Okay, so in this video, we're going to look at JSON. In the next one, we're going to look at what an API is. And in the last one, we looked at webhooks. So if you missed that, definitely check it out and come back to this video. All right, so let's look at what JSON is and how it works. Therefore, I have this very short presentation here. So what is JSON? JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, which is a lightweight data interchange format. So what is a lightweight data interchange format? Well, it's basically a format that allows you to interchange data, which means that allows you to transfer data from one software solution to another, or from one server to another. So basically, when you are working with different modules and you want to transfer a lot of data and you want to transfer it with an HTTP request, for example, you need to bring it into the right format. And the format is going to be JSON. Why is JSON such a good format? Well, because it is a structured key value pair format with arrays and nested objects and all the good stuff, but basically it just allows us to convert data that is stored, let's say, in a database into a format that is readable for humans, but also very efficiently readable by computers. So that's really the main point here. So let's look at what this JSON looks like. So here we have a JSON object, and this JSON object contains a bunch of information. So it contains the age, it contains the name, the skills, and the address. All three of them, or there are three different things that are happening in here. So we have the key value pair, which you can see here. So the key is always a string. That's the left part here. For example, age, name, skills is always a string. What is a string? A string is text. So when you are using strings or text inside of JSON, you need to surround it by quotations. All right. And then you have the values, and the values, they can be strings, numbers, arrays, booleans, or other objects. And what strings and numbers are, you will know now. Arrays are basically just collections of data. Booleans are values that can be true or false. And other objects can be another, for example, JSON object, or an object that is a little more complex. We're going to look at that in this video. So here in this case, we have an object with four pairs of keys and values. So we have this age, which is 25. We have the name, which is Dennis. So we have a key value pair age 25, where age is the key, 25 is the value, and both of them are strings. So this 25, for example, is stored as a string because it's surrounded by quotations. And if it weren't surrounded by quotations, then it would be considered a number. All right. And this technically makes a difference in coding, but for our purposes, we're just going to work with strings because it makes it easier to store data in a database, for example, inside of your tables, inside of, let's say, a Google Sheets document, Excel, and so forth. So let's look at this in a little more easier to read way, okay? So let's go over to our module here, and I ran it real quick. Okay, so I ran a webhook, which I connected with this tool called Airtable. You don't have to do that. I'm going to show you how to create a webhook that will give you this depth of information. So it will be a quite a long webhook, but you can achieve that without having to subscribe to a tool such as Airtable in order to make this run. So what we have here is we have this module that is a JSON module. It says create JSON, and we're going to build this out in a bit as well. But before we do that, let's see what the execution of this JSON module does for us. So it creates, or it takes the output from this webhook here, and it creates this JSON string. So it creates a string of type JSON. All right. So the string contains this information. Let's just copy this information, and let's go to a website that makes strings or JSON a little more readable. So this, for example, here, jsonformatter.curiousconcepts.com allows you to make this a little more difficult string of JSON data more readable. So I'm gonna paste it in here, click on process, and then it makes this beautiful formatted JSON data for me. So it created this more readable format that I can now work with. So what is in here? What can I see? I can see that the age is 25, the name is Dennis. So these are simple, but what is going on here? Well, here we have this thing called skills and we have a plural. So skills can be multiple things. So if you want to store multiple information within one key, for example, skills, then you need to use something called an array. An array can have multiple pieces of information. In this case, it has the automation, it has the coding, and it has teaching. And each of those are strings because they are surrounded by quotations and they are separated by a comma. However, they start or they are surrounded by squared brackets. So if you see squared brackets in a JSON document or in a JSON file, you know that this is an array. And then we have the address here. So the address, this is again surrounded by curly brackets. So it's surrounding it not by squared brackets as we saw here, because otherwise we could think it's an array. Well, this is not an array. This is an object itself. An object can have multiple properties, so to speak. So an address consists of multiple properties. For example, the zip, the city. Now you could obviously go ahead and make it more complex where you also add the street, for example, a street name, the number, the person's name, or the addressant's name or so, right? But let's just keep it simple where we just have the zip and the city. So this is the format that we have for our JSON file that is based on this database entry. So I'm taking the age, I'm taking the skills, and I'm taking the address. And all of these pieces of information, also the name, all of these pieces of information are transferred via this webhook. So this webhook has all of these relevant details. And now what we did is we converted it into JSON. So in order to create JSON out of it, we need to create something called a data structure. Okay, so let's go ahead and build this out from scratch. Therefore, I go back to the scenario that we built in the last video where we looked at what webhooks are and how they work. So I'm going to get rid of this OpenAI module and I'm going to search for JSON here, and there you will find this create JSON module. All right, so now it says create JSON and it asks me for a data structure. Now, obviously I can select data structures that were there already, or I can create one myself. So I'm going to call this one Webhooks tutorial data structure, or you could call it, let's say, HTTP tutorial data structure. Maybe that's better. And then I need to give it a specification. So here the specification is the items that I want to create a JSON out of. For example, I want to give it the name of the first item in my JSON object, and that was the age. So I can store the age as a text, as we have done here. So you see, we store it as text, it's surrounded by quotations. Otherwise, you could make it a number, but then, for example, let's say you get the data from your database, and here the age is actually stored as a number. So here you see it is stored as a number, but it can also just be very easily converted into text by make. So you could keep it as number, or you can use it as text. Using it as text makes a few things later on easier, but that's something that would go beyond the scope of this video. So the default can be empty, but you can also set a default. So let's say you don't get any value from your webhook, you could set the age to, let's say, 0, for example, or to be more precise, quotation, 0 quotation. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave it as default. Then we're not going to say it's required, and because if it's required and the data isn't passed, then it would cause an error. Now, obviously, sometimes you want that because you need the data maybe later on, but sometimes you don't need it. Okay, then we have multi-align, which I'm going to set to no. And now I'm going to add more items. So by the way, multi-align is if you have multiple pieces of data that is stored or given over multiple lines. So if it's a lot of data, then yes would be an option. But usually for a name or so, it's not necessary. So here we stored the age. Now let's store the name. And I'm going to use name as the name of this second property. Okay, so coming back to our JSON format, this is the second property. Now, looking at how I called it in my other example, I'm going to capitalize age as well as name, at least the first letter. So this will be also of type text. Then I'm going to add another item, and the other item would be skills. Okay, so skills now we saw is of type array. So let's go ahead and use array here. So I'm going to say skills, and the type should be array. Now, once I select array, I need to define what the type of every single item in the array is going to be. And every single item is also going to be a text. Okay, so I'm gonna add another item to make it even more complex, which is this time object. So the address you see was not an array. It didn't have squared brackets, but it had curly brackets. So the name will be address and the type will be where I will have to set it to a collection. So I need to store it as a collection and I need to define what the specifications are. So for example, one item is zip. So I'll need to set that to zip and it's just going to be text. And another item was my city. Okay, so I'm going to set that to city. All right. So once I saved that data structure, you will find that this is what our JSON creator, this create JSON module, is expecting. It's expecting an age, a name, skills, zip, and city. And all of them are obligatory. So all of them are optional. I never set any of them to be required. Okay. So here, if you want to modify this data structure, you can click into these little dotted lines here and click on edit and you can modify whatever you want. So for example, if you wanted to make the age mandatory, you could make it required in here. Okay. So now that we will create this JSON object, well, make doesn't like it when like this module is the last module in the loop. So I'm going to add a tools module where I'm just going to set a variable and the variable name will be name and the variable value will just be name. Okay. I'm just going to do that for now. I'm not going to go into that for for this point in the video, but now let's go ahead and make sure that we run our webhook again. So it was this URL here. Let's run this webhook again and see how the JSON object is created for us by this JSON module. Okay, so I'm going to say run once. I'm going to go over to my webhook. This was the URL for the webhook. And after that, I passed or entered the name as Dennis and the age as 36. Okay, so let me run this. And once I do, my automation should run through and you will see that none of the information was entered in here and it created an empty JSON string for me. So not empty, but with null information. So just says null, null, null. Null is going to be used whenever you don't pass any details. So now what we can do is we can use the data from the webhook. So for example, I can assign age as the age that I get from the webhook, and I can assign name as the name. So now let's do that again. Let's run this code again with the same URL here, with the same webhook. And then the JSON will look a little different. So you see, we get the age, we get the name, but we don't get any skills and address yet. So how can we modify our URL to pass this information as well? Well, we need to add the ampersand sign, then skills equals, for example, I have skills in automation, in coding, and teaching. And I'm separating all of them with a comma. And then I want to store the address. So the address is a tricky one. So the address, if we look at it, consists of zip as well as city. So how can I pass the zip as well as the city with the address? Because this is not an array, right? This is an object or a collection. So in order to pass this, I need to say address.zip is going to be, let's say, equal 10,001. And then the address of the city, and here I need to use the and sign again. So address.city is going to be equals to New York. And you can pass an empty space here, but it's better if you use the %20 or %20. This is the equivalent of an empty space. So New York. I'm going to run this once my automation is ready. Okay, so I'm going to run this webhook, okay, or trigger the webhook. So now we will see that all of the information is passed. So zip is passed, city is passed, the skills are passed. So now I can modify my JSON object here to pass the zip, which will be this, and the city, which will be this, and the skills, which will be the skills. All right. And actually, let's see if this is going to do it. I don't think we will get the skills correctly, but let's try it. So let's run this again. And we see that we get the skills. Well, did separate them, but actually it put all of them into one variable, well, one slot. Okay, so let's copy this and see how it looks like. inside of our JSON formatter. So let me run this and you will see what I mean. So here, the skills, they are not separated. So they're all one skill. Even though they should be multiple separated skills like you see here, they are now considered as one skill. So how can we make sure that the skills are stored like they were here? Well, we need to modify our webhook where we're going to say skills equals automation and skills equals coding and skills equals teaching. Okay, once we pass all of this information like that, let's run it once again. And we run our script and we should now see that we get it in the right format. Let me make sure that I run it again correctly. Running it, there we are. And yeah, I didn't modify this JSON, that's why. So here I need to say that the skills should be like so, and add another item. So here I am assuming that I have 3 items. So I'm going to use item 0, I'm going to use item 1, and I'm going to use item 2 in here. So now if we run this again, we will see that now we get our skills as individual items. So I might have made a mistake in here with the first one where it says skills automation, but I think you get the point. So skills 0, it didn't seem to like. So let's use skills 1, 2, and 3. All right, so let's run it again. And now we have coding, automation, and teaching. So all 3. And now if we run this again through our JSON formatter with the updated file, you can see that the skills are stored as separate entities inside of our JSON file. So this is a little tinkering, but I hope it shows you how it technically works and how the different aspects of JSON strings work. So we have created a JSON object now. So the last thing that I want to show you is how you can parse JSON. So we've seen how to take data that we have gotten from a webhook, or in this case from a table. So I built this other automation with this database here, but you need to have a paid account in order to make it work properly because of the automation. So I'm not going to go into that in depth here, but how can I get it? Well, how can I do it the other way around? So how can I take a JSON object or a JSON file, so the JSON text, so to speak, and make it so that I can use the individual variables of it? Because if we look at our output here, we cannot do that. Let me show you how. So let me actually get rid of this set variable. And here I'm going to parse JSON. And what this does is it takes a JSON string, and out of that JSON string, it creates variables that we can then use as output for our work. So let me show you. I'm going to use the data structure that we used earlier. And as a JSON string, I'm going to use the one that we get as an output from here. So from 6, you can see that once you click in it, you see that it says 6.JSON string, which means it gets it from this particular module. So we take this JSON string output and parse it into objects. So let me again use this set variable here, where I'm going to say name is going to be name. This is really just to make sure that make doesn't complain that we are using a parsing of a JSON module as the last module inside of this scenario. So let's run this once again, and let's run it with our webhook that we created last time. And you will see that it takes the JSON string as an input and it creates all of these outputs for us. So the individual variables. So it gives me the age, the name, the skills as an array, the address as zip, and city as a collection. So now I can go ahead and here I can now use all of these details from parse JSON. I can use the age, the name, the skills, the address in the right format. So obviously we wouldn't need that because we get the data from this webhook, but sometimes you get the response as a JSON string, and sometimes you want to create a JSON string. So here we created the JSON string, and here we saw how we can take a JSON string and make usable objects or variables out of it so that we can use them throughout the rest of our automation. Okay, so this was it for this video. A little longer than anticipated, but you learned a lot of things about JSON, how to use the create JSON module, as well as the parse JSON module. Okay. And in the next video, we're going to see what an API is. And then we will look at how we can make HTTP requests. Okay. So see you in the next video. And by the way, make sure to subscribe as well, because you don't want to miss when we publish it. And also, if you're at it, please leave a like. I'd be very happy about that. And if you want to dive really deep into AI automation with make.com, definitely check out my school, AI Automation Specialists, where you're gonna get a bunch of really cool templates and obviously the AI Automation Masterclass. We're going to learn how to master Airtable and make.com. So the tutorials that you see here are really just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to learn and build some amazing automations. Also, you can check out some of the automations in the, on this YouTube channel. Right, so see you in the next one.